She felt it before she even sat down. Something was off. The cabin smelled like overused air freshener and burnt coffee, but that wasn't it. It was the tension, subtle, like the heaviness in the air before a thunderstorm. Jasmine clutched the strap of her backpack tighter as she walked down the aisle, scanning the seat numbers. 12A window. Perfect. She gave a polite nod to the man in 12B and slid into her seat, letting out a quiet breath. She had earned this. A semester abroad. Full scholarship. Months of juggling night shifts and classes. This wasn't just a seat on a plane. This was her future taking off. She barely had time to pull out her book when a sharp voice sliced through the calm. "Excuse me," the woman said, standing just beside her row. "My son needs that seat. You can move somewhere else." Jasmine looked up, startled. The woman was tall, immaculately dressed, hair pulled into a tight blonde bun. Her teenage son stood behind her, staring at the floor. "I'm sorry," Jasmine said carefully. "This is my assigned seat." The woman's mouth twisted slightly, not quite a smile. More like annoyance dressed up as politeness. "Yes, but he likes the window. And I'm sure you don't mind being flexible." Her voice was honeyed, but the tone wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in a smile. Jasmine blinked. For a second, she thought she misheard. But then she saw it. The look. Not just impatience. Not just entitlement. That cold, dismissive flicker in the woman's eyes. Like Jasmine didn't belong there. All around them, silence grew. Passengers nearby turned ever so slightly, pretending not to listen. But their ears were wide open. And Jasmine? She sat frozen, not because she didn't know what to say. But because she suddenly felt 12 years old again. Back in that grocery store with her mom, being followed by a security guard, just in case. But this time, she wasn't going to stay quiet. She opened her mouth. But before she could speak, a voice behind them interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" The flight attendant had arrived. Tall, sharp-eyed, calm. And what she said next? No one on that plane was ready for it. The flight attendant stood with perfect posture, one hand lightly resting on the seat in front of her, the other clutching a small tablet. Her name tag read Maria, and there was a steadiness in her eyes, the kind of calm that says I've seen things, and I'm not here for nonsense. The mother turned to her, instantly changing tone. "Yes," she said, gesturing toward Jasmine like she was pointing out a spill on the floor. "This young lady is sitting in my son's seat. He really prefers the window. I'm sure it's just a mistake." Jasmine opened her mouth to speak, again, but Maria raised one hand gently, eyes never leaving the mother. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding passes?" The woman huffed but pulled them from her designer handbag. Maria scanned them quickly. "You're in 14C and 14D. Aisle and middle. Not 12A. The woman's smile slipped just slightly. "Yes, I know, but I thought." Maria didn't flinch. Her tone stayed neutral, but there was steel beneath the surface. "I understand, but this passenger," she nodded toward Jasmine, "is in her assigned seat. She will remain here." The cabin remained silent, all eyes subtly, and not so subtly, watching. The mother's eyes darted between Maria and Jasmine, searching for something, maybe backup, maybe sympathy. She found neither. She muttered something under her breath and turned sharply, bumping Jasmine's knee with her designer purse as she stalked back down the aisle. Her son followed quietly, still avoiding eye contact. Maria turned to Jasmine, her expression softening. "You okay?" Jasmine nodded slowly, heart still thudding. "Thank you." Maria leaned in slightly and added, just loud enough for a few people around to hear. "You don't have to move for anyone. Especially not people like that." A beat of silence. Then, from somewhere in row 11, a slow clap. One person, then two, then a handful. Not a standing ovation, but enough. Enough to make Jasmine feel like she wasn't invisible. For the first time that day, she smiled. But the flight hadn't even taken off yet. And this wouldn't be the last time someone would test her. The plane hummed to life as the engines fired up, the cabin lights dimming slightly in preparation for takeoff. Jasmine leaned back in her seat, fingers still curled tight around the armrest. She hadn't realized how hard her heart was pounding until the adrenaline began to fade. Outside the window, the runway stretched endlessly into the horizon, heat waves rippling off the tarmac. But her mind wasn't on the view. It was still replaying the woman's face, that look. That moment. She had seen it before. Too many times. In classrooms, on sidewalks, in stores. The quiet assumption that she was in the wrong place. She took a breath and let her shoulders drop. First time flying alone, the man next to her asked gently. He was maybe in his 50s, kind eyes, a faded ball cap that read, Navy veteran. Jasmine nodded. Yeah. First time out of the country, actually. He smiled. Where to? Amsterdam. Semester abroad. Architecture program. His brows lifted, impressed. That's incredible. You must have worked your tail off. She nodded again, but didn't elaborate. He didn't press. As the plane began to taxi, she glanced back down the aisle. The woman from earlier was seated 2 rows behind her, on the opposite side. She wasn't looking at Jasmine, not anymore. She was scrolling through her phone, lips pursed, one heel bobbing irritably. Maria, the flight attendant, walked past them, doing a final check before takeoff. As she passed Jasmine's row, she gave the slightest nod. Just enough to say, I see you. I've got your back. And in that tiny moment, Jasmine felt something shift. It wasn't just about the seat. It never had been. It was about standing your ground when the world tells you to move. The plane turned onto the runway. Engines roared. The cabin shook as they began to rise. Jasmine looked out the window, and for the first time, the view didn't feel like escape. It felt like a beginning. But somewhere, a few rows back, the woman's fingers were flying across her phone, typing a message, her face twisted with something that looked a lot like revenge. And that message? It would change everything before the flight was over. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm, soft hum of engines, the occasional ding of a call button, whispers of conversation. Jasmine had just started to relax, earbuds in, gazing out at the cottony stretch of clouds below, when Maria reappeared. She wasn't smiling. Miss Johnson, she said softly. Jasmine pulled out her earbuds, surprised. Yes. Maria leaned closer, her voice low but firm. I need to speak with you. Could you come with me, please? Heads turned. Jasmine blinked, a knot forming in her stomach. Is something wrong? Maria didn't answer, not directly. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the back of the cabin. Jasmine stood, heart racing, and followed her down the aisle. As she passed the mother and her son, the woman didn't look up, but a small, satisfied smirk curled at the corner of her mouth. Maria led Jasmine to the galley near the rear of the plane. Another flight attendant was already there, standing stiffly next to a small screen. Maria handed Jasmine a printed sheet of paper. It was a complaint. Filed mid-flight. Accusing her of being verbally aggressive. Of threatening a child. Of refusing to comply with crew instructions. None of it was true. Jasmine felt her skin go cold. Is this a joke? Maria shook her head slowly. We're required to document all passenger complaints. Normally, we can sort these things quietly, but this one's been flagged. Flagged? Jasmine repeated, her voice tight. Maria hesitated. Then, lowered her voice. She has airline status. Gold. And a connection to the regional manager. Of course she does. Jasmine swallowed hard. The woman hadn't just wanted the window seat. She wanted control. Maria stepped in closer. I don't believe a word of it. But my hands are tied right now. I need you to stay calm. Don't engage her. Don't even look at her. Jasmine's voice cracked. Am I in trouble? No. But she wants you to be. And suddenly, it wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about power. About someone with influence trying to twist the truth, and erase Jasmine in the process. But Jasmine had come too far, fought through too much, to be erased quietly. As Maria walked her back to her seat, Jasmine made a decision. She wasn't going to just defend herself. She was going to expose the truth. Back in her seat, Jasmine sat motionless, eyes forward, earbuds in, but no music playing. Her mind was racing. A complaint. A false complaint. And the worst part? She knew how easily it could stick. One wrong tone, one misstep, and she'd be labeled difficult, aggressive, non-compliant. Words that followed people like her far beyond airplanes. The man beside her noticed the shift in her energy. You okay? He asked, gently. Jasmine forced a small nod. Just, turbulence. He smiled faintly, but she could tell he knew something was off. She glanced at the call button above her, finger hovering, but didn't press it. No. Not yet. She needed to think. She remembered something her older sister once told her. Don't fight fire with fire. Fight it with light. Make it so bright no one can ignore it. So Jasmine pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, and began typing. Every detail. The exact words the woman said. The look on her face. The moment the complaint was shown to her. Maria's warning. She wasn't going to be erased. She was going to record everything. The passenger across the aisle, a younger woman in a hoodie and glasses, leaned in slightly. I saw what happened, she said quietly. I mean, the real thing. Not whatever she's saying. Jasmine looked at her, surprised. I was 2 rows behind you, the woman added. She told you to move before you even had your seatbelt on. I saw your face. You didn't do anything wrong. A pause. I'll say something if it comes up. If they ask. Jasmine's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much she needed that, just one person to say, I saw you. Thank you, she whispered. The flight attendant, Maria, passed by again. No words this time, but her presence felt like quiet backup. A subtle shield. Meanwhile, the woman in 14C was sipping champagne, scrolling through her phone like she owned the sky. But Jasmine wasn't done. She switched apps. Opened her camera. Flipped to selfie mode, but didn't hit record. Not yet. Not until it mattered most. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. A cart rolled quietly down the aisle, passengers ordering snacks, wine, coffee. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a normal flight. But inside Jasmine, a fire was building. She wasn't just angry. She was done. Maria passed again, and Jasmine caught her eye. A subtle nod passed between them. Jasmine had made her decision. She was going to record a statement, midair. Not to go viral. Not for attention. But because truth, when told calmly and clearly, had power. Especially when people like her were often robbed of the chance to tell it. She waited. Watched the woman in 14C laugh at something on her phone. The smirk hadn't left her face since boarding. Then Jasmine stood up, slow, calm, and walked toward the back galley where she had spoken with Maria earlier. No one stopped her. There, by the coffee machine, with her phone angled up against a water bottle, Jasmine hit record. Her voice was steady. Low. Controlled. My name is Jasmine Johnson. I'm a student. I'm on this flight to Amsterdam for a semester abroad that I worked incredibly hard for. Today, I was told to move out of my assigned seat by a woman who decided she was entitled to it because of who she is, and who I am. When I refused, she filed a false complaint. She lied. And because she has status, her lie traveled faster than the truth. But here's the thing, I have nothing to hide. And I will not be quiet so she can stay comfortable. She stopped the recording. Then, without overthinking it, she uploaded it to her private Instagram account. She had maybe 300 followers, mostly friends, classmates, family. She captioned it. If anything happens before I land, I want this story to exist somewhere. She turned to head back to her seat. And nearly bumped into Maria. The flight attendant had been standing there silently, listening. For a second, they just looked at each other. Then Maria said, soft but strong. You did the right thing. But even as Jasmine returned to her seat, a ripple was already starting. Back on the ground, her video was gaining traction. Shared once. Then twice. Then a dozen times. It wasn't loud yet, but it was building. And 14C still had no idea what was coming. Somewhere over the Atlantic, while the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight stretch and most passengers drifted into quiet sleep, something else was waking up. Jasmine's phone buzzed softly in her pocket. Once. Then again. Then constantly. She pulled it out and blinked at the notifications. Mentions. Reposts. Messages. Her video, the one she recorded less than an hour ago, was spreading. It had been reposted by a classmate with a larger following. Then by a student group account. Then someone tagged a journalist. By the time it hit 10,000 views, Jasmine's heart was in her throat. She hadn't meant for it to go wide. She just needed someone to hear her. To have her version out there. But now, it wasn't just out there, it was everywhere. And people were responding. We see you. She said it with her chest, respect. Tag the airline. They need to answer for this. Where's the flight number? Somebody find it. Maria appeared beside her row, crouched gently to Jasmine's level. You okay? She whispered. Jasmine showed her the phone. Maria's brows lifted. Then a slow smile crept across her face. Well, she said, looks like the seat isn't the only thing you're holding on to. They both laughed, quiet, short, real. But not everyone was smiling. 3 rows back, the woman in 14C had finally noticed. Her son leaned over and whispered something, showing her his phone. Jasmine saw her glance up, eyes scanning the cabin like she suddenly realized she wasn't in control anymore. And for the first time all flight, the smirk was gone. She stood abruptly, storming down the aisle toward Maria. I need to speak to the captain, she snapped. Right now. Maria didn't even blink. Ma'am, please return to your seat. The woman's voice pitched louder. She's filming me. She's turning people against me. This is harassment. Jasmine didn't move. Didn't speak. She didn't have to anymore. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't protecting the powerful. It was standing with her. Passengers shifted. Someone filmed. Someone else muttered, she's the one who lied. The tide had turned. And it wasn't turning back. The woman stood frozen for a moment, realizing what was happening, what she had lost. Not her seat. Her silence shield. She turned, stormed back to 14C. Maria leaned down to Jasmine again. Just a heads up. I got a message from ground control. The airline's already aware. They'll be waiting when we land. Jasmine's pulse quickened. For me? No, Maria said. For her. The first light of dawn crept through the cabin windows as the plane began its descent. Amsterdam glowed beneath a layer of mist, orange and pink bleeding across the skyline. It should have been beautiful. Calming. But Jasmine's heart beat faster with every passing minute. She hadn't slept. She barely moved. The weight of what was waiting outside the plane pressed heavier than any luggage in the overhead bins. Maria walked the aisle one last time, checking seatbelts, tray tables, eyes meeting Jasmine's for a beat longer than the others. Steady. You've made it. The wheels hit the runway with a jolt, and the cabin filled with the usual rustling, seatbelts clicking open, phones switching off airplane mode. But this time, there was something else in the air. Anticipation. As the plane rolled to a stop, a new voice came over the speaker. Calm. Official. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll be deplaning shortly. Certain passengers are asked to stay on board for a brief conversation with airport authorities. Gasps. A ripple. All heads turned to the back. The woman in 14C sat stiff, eyes wide. Her son looked pale, like he wanted to disappear into the seat. A security officer and an airline rep stepped on board, quiet but firm. They walked straight to her row. Ma'am, we'd like to speak with you. She stood, flustered, stammering about misunderstandings and status and, this is outrageous. But the cabin wasn't with her anymore. No one looked away. No one came to her defense. Not anymore. Jasmine sat still, watching. Not with spite. Not with revenge. Just, presence. She didn't have to say a word. The truth was already louder than anything that woman could scream. As the rest of the passengers finally began to exit, one by one, many passed Jasmine, some with a nod, some with a soft, "You handled that with grace," others with nothing but a look that said "we saw." The man from 12B patted her shoulder gently as he passed. "You didn't just hold your seat," he said. "You held the line." Maria waited by the door. As Jasmine stepped out, Maria leaned in. "You changed something up there." Jasmine smiled, exhausted but proud. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes," Maria said, "that's the bravest thing you can do." Jasmine stepped into the tunnel. Into the new city. The new chapter. The life she'd worked for. And behind her, the door of the plane closed with a soft final click, like the end of a story that belonged to someone else now. This story was hers.